It's redemption for a way of life which is built upon the structural exploitation of large numbers of people globally. So, you know, cheap food, cheap energy, cheap fuel, cheap consumer goods, tourist destinations where you'll be safe, where you can go and see nature without getting mugged by the people who are cleared off the streets, all of these sorts of things. All of that is built on, the unconscious of that world will have guilt within it, but you can feel redeemed because you give money to MSF or Amnesty or Greenpeace or somebody. Don't worry, good people are out there, sort of correcting the sins on which this is based. So the second thing is the interests of Western publics. Okay, in what is the interest of Western publics rooted? It's not rooted in large-scale altruism. It's either rooted in this alibi and redemption, or it's rooted in what in effect has been a market created for humanitarianism and human rights, which is where I've done most of my work in the last 30 or 40 years. What you're renting is something like feeling good, something like, that's why child sponsorship is so successful, because it gives you this glow that you're helping an identifiable person. This is why Western publics are, by and large, funding this humanitarian endeavour. Not everyone, of course, but large numbers of them, the sort of scale that we're talking about. So humanitarianism must work for those Western states, and it must work for those Western publics too. And here my sort of take-home point is the following, which is there's so much talk about, so ODI's time to let go, again, I'll mention that at my next point, devolving partnerships, networks, okay, giving money to the South, engaging the South more. What happens if Western publics, by and large, lose interest in funding this system is there's no money in the system anymore. Okay? Not that money is now controlled, managed, and priorities are set by poor Southern NGOs. That money goes into something else, is spent on something else, spent on risk management, potentially. So I see this system as irredeemably unequal and structured hierarchically. Okay? You will not be able, the assumption that a changed world, which is more solidaristic and has more, like the Southern network of NGOs, is more involved. The money is not a gift without an exchange associated with it. You should think about it in terms of an exchange, okay? Western publics are renting various feel-good things in return for their donation. If they're not getting that back, they're going to spend it on something else, okay? What that is, I don't know. Now, what happened with the end of the Cold War? People like Fukuyama said this is the end of history. Others said this is the end of ideology. This is the beginning of the world that Mark was outlining, I think, really sort of gathering speed. The liberals took over, okay, late 80s, early 90s. And what the liberals have is a form of management of the system, but they don't have a diagnosis of root causes. Because the very system that produces these liberals is the very system which they're sort of committed to upholding. And you see this nowhere better than in the case of the failure to address inequality. So more attempts to divert more money into humanitarian, human rights and other causes, but no fundamental challenge to the way in which the political economic system works, and no argument really about large-scale redistribution. So liberals just manage the system. Okay, they try to avoid its worst excesses. They try to prevent it erupting into a sort of systemic level crisis. But maybe in line with Mark, what I want to suggest is that world has effectively is being slowly brought to a halt. This crisis is now systemic. It's systemic politically. Look in Western states at how these protest candidates are no longer just protest candidates. Donald Trump will be the Republican candidate for president. It is not impossible he would be elected. It's unlikely, but not impossible. In all sorts of other Western states, you see strong right-wing protest candidates. These are the candidates of large numbers of Western people, a lot of them white working-class manufacturing men, saying nobody is listening to us anymore, and we are the core of these societies. Then you have the refugee crisis, okay? It's not being managed over there anymore. It's now front and center within these developed societies. So in effect, what's happened is history, ideology has come back. Liberalism doesn't really have a way to deal with this. For me, the end of the political world was a world in which effectively what had happened was the sort of affluent middle class had secured a position within this world from the late 80s, early 90s onwards, in which it was going to become increasingly affluent and increasingly wealthy. I walked around Beirut yesterday looking for signs of that affluent middle class. They're everywhere, in the marinas and the developments downtown, and you can see all of that, but it's obviously a very small group of people. Now, the question is, these are the people with the money. These are the people who are often most active in supporting human rights and other organisations, international campaigns of one sort or another. Which way will they tip? Okay? So you're either with us or against us, presumes a world in which they have to choose. They are opinion formers, professionals. They're people with surplus time and money sometimes. They're people who can really influence governments, and they have a voice internationally. Which way will they tip? And that, for me, is the big question. Will they support progressive causes and, as it were, go with the liberal left, or will they support counterterrorism and combating ISIS causes and go with the centre-right to the right? And that's what you see across most developed countries, that struggle. Are we more worried about being blown up at home? Are we more worried about starvation and inequality overseas? And that's the sort of hidden side of the growth of inequality. Another tranche of people who have a stake in the existing system because it's made them very affluent. Now, are there then enough people at the level below that? You see what's happened to unionisation and organised unions in most of the Western world. These were the organising grounds for collective action against governments and against social injustice. And they've been eviscerated in many developed countries. So where will that organisation come from? Where will people come together physically in numbers and organise around forms of resistance? New political parties, maybe, but as I was saying to Mark a little bit earlier, maybe something worse, maybe what we haven't seen for a long time, which is serious organised violence in Western developed societies, where the Trump supporters who see him destroyed in the election, will then become much more militant about trying to make their voice heard. Maybe back to the world of the anarchists in the late 19th century, something like that.